Wall Street veteran Bernard Madoff has been arrested and charged with running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme.
Congress wants to know what caused the Enron meltdown.
Now, while the collective rage currently is focused on WorldCom,
Tyco CEO Dennis Kozlowski was convicted of looting hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is one of the biggest fraud cases ever.
Their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Find out more on this week's episode of White Collars, Red Hands.
We've got to talk about the largest financial scandals to come out of various countries here on White Collars, Red Hands. We've discussed Enron in America, Christopher Skase in Australia, and Carrion Group in Hong Kong, among others. But with 195 recognized countries in the world, well, we're not even close to scraping the bottom of the barrel. We still have quite a few more to go. And today we check another off the list as we discuss Steinhoff International, a holding group originating out of Germany, but eventually migrating to South Africa, where it became one of the largest companies listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the largest of its kind in the country. Of course, this meant that the fall of the retail giant after an accounting scandal was first uncovered in 2017 became the largest corporate downfall in South African history. So let's find out the history behind Steinhoff International, how it rose to power and dominance, and how this oversized liability machine crumbled under its own weight, leaving behind ruined lives and at least one body in its wake.
Nelson Mandela would not approve.
You're gonna land on Nelson Mandela?
Nelson Mandela is the best thing to ever happen to South Africa.
I don't know. You're probably right.
He's on all the money.
That's true.
He's on every single bill.
The best thing to happen to any country, that's what's on all of their money. That's why white dudes are on all of America's, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for the Sacagawea coin.
Do you say Sacagawea?
Yeah. How do you say it?
Sacagawea?
Okay.
We're gonna have to call the judge on that one.
In Ohio, we call her Sacagawea.
Yeah, you say a bunch of shit in Ohio. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of White Collars, Red Hands. I'm Kashan.
And I'm Nina.
And as the intro told you, we're talking about Steinhoff International, which is not, it's not a fun name. I don't know if you can tell, there's not a lot of whimsy in today's episode. I wish it was whimsical. I keep trying to find a way to make the accounting scandals
whimsical.
To have some whimsy, have some fun.
Sometimes things don't have whimsy. And that's okay, Kashan. Yeah. Not everything has to have whimsy. Sometimes things are just bad.
I mean, you can wear fun socks to a funeral.
That's true.
Right? That's all I'm going to say. You can throw a little whimsy into almost everything.
That's true.
So as the name seems to suggest, Steinhoff was originally a product of Germany. Steinhoff, it's a pretty German name.
Yes, that is the most German name I've ever heard, actually.
Oh, not the most German name.
It's pretty fucking German.
Hans has to be in there if it's the most German name. It was founded in 1964 by a now German billionaire, Bruno Steinhoff, who had the completely original idea of naming his company after himself.
Lots of people do it. People name their children after themselves.
It's very common. You're correct. Steinhoff aimed at providing a budget furniture business to Western Europe and did so through a sort of arbitrage by purchasing furniture cheaply from what were the communist countries at the time in Eastern Europe, and then selling it at what is a discount price in the more capitalist Western Europe.
So when he was getting the furniture from Eastern Europe, was it like they were making the furniture there? Like furniture companies were making it there and he was selling it at a discount?
Yeah.
Okay. Or were
Can you tell me what the alternative to that would be?
I don't know why I was thinking they were taking people's furniture.
Yeah, they were
and selling it. Like they were stealing couches and then selling them at discounted rates to Western Europe.
Hey, you commie bastards! Give me your 4-piece dining set.
I want your sofa right now. Give me that fucking coffee table.
Oh, we're taking the outdoor stuff too. I love those patio chairs. Nothing you can do about it.
They're like, oh no.
No, they were just it was cheaper to produce there because of
communism.
The economies were worse there, so they were cheaper to buy there and then sell.
The economies were terrible there.
Europe. So then, after doing this successfully for a while, they started manufacturing their own. They bought a bunch of like upholstery factories and they started making their own upholstered furniture instead of just providing this resale starting in 1989. And they were slowly growing a decent size market in the European furniture game, which is dominated by, to this day, I don't know if it was at this time, but Ikea.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about this, I was like, had he not heard of Ikea?
No, they, so basically.
When was Ikea founded? 1943. So they had Ikea.
Yeah. You will be, I mean, I mentioned it somewhere in here, but like pretty much this whole time, they're like the second largest in Europe behind Ikea, like at all points.
Steinhoff's discount furniture.
Right now, but yeah. Meanwhile, in South Africa, a man named Markus Jooste was born in the winter of 1961 into a middle-class family. His dad worked for the Postal Service and was known for his love of betting on horse races. Jooste also grew up with a love of horses. He would go on to be very involved in like horse breeding later in life.
That's strange.
But decided instead to eschew equine biology and went to school for accounting, and he got a bachelor's in accounting from Stellenbosch University in Stellenbosch, South Africa.
Okay.
And eventually got an honors degree, which from what I can understand is basically, it's like a postgraduate degree, I think like a master's, not like a PhD. So kind of like an MBA, but in accounting. So he could earn a chartered accountant degree, which in short is just kind of like the highest South African recognition for an accountant. It's basically like you're a CPA.
Okay.
But it felt higher because you had to have a postgraduate degree to become a certified like chartered accountant.
Makes sense.
Whatever. It's how they do things. He spent some time as a financial director for a public company before becoming the financial director of a South African furniture company by the name of Goma Goma. And here he met a German businessman named Klaus Daun.
That's pretty fucking German.
Klaus?
Klaus, yes.
But it's not Klaus. It's
Klaus.
Claas. So Klaus?
Oh, no.
Dawn? I don't know. Who showed, and Klaus showed him the ropes and eventually provided the connection to Bruno Steinhoff because they had known each other. The two got together and decided it would be mutually beneficial for them to merge their furniture holdings in Europe and South Africa into one big company. So they did. But they kept Bruno's name, and their furniture baby would be known as Steinhoff International. Although, remember, it was already technically, it was in Europe. It was international already. It was way outside of Germany, but they were like, sure.
We'll call it that now.
Well, it's Steinhoff International. I think so like that is like yada yada-ing it a little bit, like, because at first it was like Steinhoff Europe and Steinhoff Africa, and then they were like, let's just
let's just put it together.
Let's just consolidate. But that final merger was done in 1998. Daun and Jooste originally were non-executive directors, but Jooste was selected to head up the company as the CEO starting in 2000, and he immediately began building a giant. And he got in pretty quick. Like he was a financial director for a public company at the age of 27.
Oh, wow.
So he rose through the ranks pretty quickly to CEO. Yeah. And he wasted no time with Steinhoff International either. At this point, they have this whole target of like vertical integration for their furniture, where they make all their furniture and they control everything up to it being sold in stores. But what Jooste wanted to do was expand and quickly. Mm-hmm. And they did this through acquisitions. One of the quickest ways to grow a company from nothing to a big player, and just simply buying up a bunch of smaller or medium-sized fishes, just of incrementing sizes as you go along. And this has been the story of many businesses that we've discussed, especially ones that got too big, too fast, and usually had to resort to creative accounting to get around how much debt this kind of growth requires. Because you don't have this money, so you have to leverage it to buy out all these companies. And if you do it too fast and you're not careful about it, it will ultimately...
it'll become an issue.
Yeah, you're going to have to do some It's so funny. People in this were really upset because they always use the term like creative accounting, because this is also the time you got to think in South Africa, like right around when Steinhoff International comes in, apartheid was ended. And there's definitely this divide because most of these companies were and are still headed by primarily white men because of apartheid. Even though it was ended, it's still in the society. This is stuff we feel here, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, even though that ended, it's the same thing with here when slavery ended, and it took another 100 years for the civil rights movement to happen,
and we still feel effects.
And we still feel its effects. So yeah, that doesn't shock me that apartheid ended, and then all these white men were in charge of everything.
But so you see a lot of people being like, we don't like the term creative accounting because it makes it seem like they're not committing crimes when they are, and I was like, I agree with you, a lot. And they did get criticisms because the only people on their in their C-suite on their board were all pretty much white men. So, but they were taking over and getting bigger, and Steinhoff wanted to expand to other markets. And he started by purchasing an $86 million stake in the UK-based furniture company known as Homestyle Group in 2005. That was their first big addition. Then in 2011, they acquired one of the largest European home retail chains, Conforma, which is still the second largest chain of its kind with 200 stores across Europe.
Oh, wow.
Once again, second only to
Ikea.
This acquisition cost Steinhoff 1.2 million euros.
Wow.
Which pretty big acquisition, but brought in a huge amount of revenue, and more than that, showed growth. The year that Goma Goma and Steinhoff merged, they went public on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the JSE. And as we've discussed before, the biggest goal for publicly listed companies is constant growth. They want to show growth year over year. So it's not really about money targets, about just being better than last year.
Like growth targets, yeah.
And in order to keep stock prices high, there must be a year over year increase in revenue generated by the company. And this can be done by actually doing good business, making smart deals, cutting costs, making lean manufacturing procedures, or you can pull a Steinhoff and just keep acquiring more companies. It's kind of, this is a stretch, but it's a little like a Ponzi scheme, right?
Yeah.
It's like you just keep acquiring more things
in the hopes of
and you bring on debt to do it, but your revenues keep ticking up every year just because you have more stuff.
Yeah, it's impossible for it not to tick up.
But at some point, you can't buy anything else.
No, you're going to cap out.
And you're kind of boned at that point. That's what happened to a lot of companies in the 80s. And it's what happens in a lot of markets where it's it's new and open. So it was ripe to happen here in South Africa too. So every company you add means you increase your company's revenue with relatively little work compared to developing and implementing good business plans. And there were plenty more minnows to munch on as they bought Austrian home furniture chain Kika Liner in 2013. And then they made their biggest purchase in 2015 when Steinhoff acquired Pepkor for $5.7 billion.
Wow.
So 1.2 million was the biggest before this, and then they dropped 5.7 billion.
That's a huge jump.
This also did show a change of direction for Steinhoff, though, as Pepkor was a South African investment holding company that held assets outside of the realm of home furnishing retailers. And this was their first big move outside of just home furnishing. They did have Pepkor, had some holdings like Pep, which is a general retail store that targets lower to middle class buyers, which its founder, billionaire Christa Weiss, compared to being the Walmart of Africa.
Okay.
They sold clothing, shoes, household products, electronics, and even cellular phones.
Yeah, that does sound almost exactly like Walmart.
It was, and I don't think Walmart had a presence here, so this was just kind of their market at the time.
Yeah, because we did that Walmart episode, and mainly when it's outside of the country, they were in the U.S. They were obviously Walmart is mainly in the U.S., but then they have Canada and then some Mexico, and that was really it.
likely also at this time it was because of those sanctions put on because of apartheid in South Africa. Is like most countries said you can't do business in South Africa because they have this institutionalized like racist government.
Right.
So they were already here for that. Most of the other large holdings for Pepkor besides Pep were also like in the clothing and shoe space, such as Ackerman's, which was like a clothing, like a discount clothing store, Shoe City, and Tekkie Town. Tekkie, Tekkie, is a South African term for a tennis shoe. So like how we would say sneakers or like British say trainers.
Or tennis shoes.
They have Trekkies.
Trekkies.
So
that's kind of cute. I kind of like it.
Yeah. Shortly after this big investment into the South African branch of their business, Steinhoff made the interesting decision to publicly announce that they were actually focusing more on their European arm, though, and they shifted their main listing from the JSE to the Frankfurt Stock Exchange in Germany, and they joined the MDAX, which is the German equivalent of the S&P 500. Although 10% of the size, it's the top 50 like listings on the exchange in Germany. So they moved in the market. They were automatically a big player. And then they made a large European acquisition in Poundland.
Yes, I've heard of Poundland.
Oh, I'm sure you've heard of Poundland.
I've been to Poundland many a times.
Yeah, it's right next to Pound Town.
It is.
Actually.
It's just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Just a jump across the pond.
They were this close to having a store named Pound Town in Britain. That's so funny. But it's a British discount variety store.
Yes.
Which makes sounds like Poundland is basically like the Dollar Tree.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean,
right?
Yeah, their money's called the pound. So it makes sense. It's just funny.
Yes. And they bought this variety store for 610 million pounds in 2016. And sorry, there were because they're international, they bought a lot of things in a lot of different currencies.
Yeah.
Later, when we get to the accounting scandal, I converted all of them, but I didn't do it for this one because I was like, there's too many things.
That's fair. That's super fair.
You know, 610 million pounds is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
They also made their second largest acquisition to date that year, while also expanding into the United States when they acquired Mattress Firm.
What?
The subsidiary of Temper Sealy, and they acquired them for $3.8 billion.
Wow.
In 2016. At their peak, Steinhoff International did business in 30, I've actually seen multiple reports, either 30 or 32 different countries, and operated 6,500 brick and mortar stores under at least 40 different brands that it owned. And in 2018, they employed 130,000 people and reported a revenue of 12.9 billion euros. Of course, the key word there is reported, because under the surface, Markus Jooste had juiced the books, and all his dirty laundry was about to be aired out.
All that juice was about to be squeezed.
Yeah, all that juice from Pound Town.
All the Pound Town juice was about to be squeezed out. Every last drop.
I'm immediately sorry we did this bit.
Every stroke.
I have so much regret, which is usually what happens to me after Pound Town. Poundland. Fuck. You get the idea. I cry after sex.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I didn't just have sex, so I'm not crying.
Okay.
In 2015, a former business partner with Steinhoff named Andreas Seifert was in a battle over the valuation and ownership of it's POCO. I'm assuming it's POCO. It's a German furniture chain. Basically, this guy said, I actually own 50% of POCO. And Steinhoff said, no, we bought you out. You don't own any of it.
No POCO.
No POCO for you. This meant that more people from the outside and their auditor, Deloitte, was taking a closer look at their books than they had done before because he had made legal claims. He was going through court. They all had to look at this. A combined effort of journalists and regulatory bodies convinced the German police to raid the Steinhoff European office to inspect their balance sheets, which I was going to say, they found papers signed by Andreas Seifert that had his name on it, saying that he had like sold his shares, and he was like, those are forged.
Whoa.
And, you know, not just that, but some other stuff was up when they looked at their balance sheets. And the next month, the German tax authority announced that they had started an investigation into the accounting of the business. However, after 2 years, there wasn't much released. In this point, it's 2017, after that initial raid. And it started to seem as if there was nothing to discover. In August of 2017, a report came out that listed Markus Jooste as being one of the primary people under suspicion during that German investigation. And Jooste, of course, publicly denied this. But then in December, Steinhoff announced that there would be a delay in the release of their yearly financial statements due to some issues with the audit process, which set off, you know, quite a few alarms. It usually doesn't bolster confidence.
No.
And what really sent everyone into a tizzy was that the next day after that, Markus Jooste announced his resignation from the company, and that Deloitte had uncovered accounting irregularities that required a more thorough investigation.
Eek.
And Steinhoff announced that they had hired a separate auditor completely, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, to conduct this investigation. The German authorities then publicly announced that the criminal investigation started years before was still ongoing, and all of this meant that the shit really hit the fan for the stock price of Steinhoff.
Probably plummeted it. That's my guess.
Well, within the first day, the stock price, which at its highest reached almost 100 rand per share, which
is that South African?
Rand is the South African currency.
Okay.
It dipped about 57% on both the Frankfurt Stock Exchange and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and within a couple of weeks had been reduced by almost 90%.
Whoa.
And this is one of the biggest companies. Like, imagine if Amazon just like lost 90% of its market cap.
That'd be crazy.
In 2 weeks.
That'd be crazy.
In effect, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange lost a total value of 295 billion rand, which is $24 billion in 2 weeks, which was around 8% of the entire GDP of South Africa.
Oh my God.
So because of this scandal, 8% of the worth of South Africa was gone.
Oh my God.
So it wasn't great.
This is just another example of how you should not ever let a company get this big.
At least not without any sort, obviously there was some lapse in oversight.
Absolutely.
For them, you know?
Yeah.
The PwC report took a year to conduct, and in the end, they produced a 3,000-page report that has never been released publicly.
Interesting.
People in South Africa also had some stuff to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure they were pissed.
That it had not been released. What they did do, however, in early of 2019, so like a few months later, they released an 11-page summary of the report. And this is where most of the information about how the fraud was conducted actually comes from. So although he is not named explicitly in the report, it is believed that Markus Jooste, referred to likely in the report as a top executive, directed a small circle of other executives to add fictitious profits to the balance sheet. So we've seen this before.
Oh, wow.
We've seen this before. And it seems simple, but is usually actually really complicated in practice. But basically, they would create fake transactions, whether it be sales or income of any other kinds, from other companies, and then support these fake transactions with falsified documents. So like, we made these sales to X company, or the X company owed us money and they paid us some money. And at first, these entities that they were involved in these transactions, they seemed legit at first because they were all presented as completely independent from Steinhoff. There was no overlap between them. But in 2016, a little something called the Panama Papers were released.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Yeah, the Panama Papers were a huge leak of confidential documents that primarily covered information on dealings in offshore assets in the Caribbean. And it exposed a lot of shitty things that a lot of rich people were and are still doing.
I remember when that got leaked.
Yeah.
I remember that. That was a really big deal.
I think this is probably close to the time of like WikiLeaks too, right? Like it was just like confidential document leaks were just like big.
Oh, crazy.
You know? And these papers showed that these supposedly independent companies were actually controlled by executives of Steinhoff or their close associates. So they were dealing on both sides. And before those papers came out, it was kind of obfuscated. So Steinhoff said that they were getting revenue in from these fake sales. But since no money ever changed hands, the PwC report referred to these as non-recoverable loans. So basically, like, you say you got money from someone, but you didn't actually get it. So they called it a non-recoverable loan because there was never a plan to ever actually pay that money into the company. So Steinhoff would take that and then would disguise them as assets instead of liabilities. Like, obviously, they weren't going to put, like, loans on their balance sheet.
Right.
So they instead would write these transactions on their balance sheet as just cash, which would make it seem like they, had better liquidity, just cash in a bank account somewhere. They would also disguise them as property investments or inflate the worth of their property, and they'd hide some of the money that way. Or they would paint them as investments into intellectual property. So basically, they turned what was debt that they were never going to get back into something that looked like they could get money back at any time. They turned it into assets. Then, if they did put them on the books as actual debts, which they did do sometimes, they owned so many companies, they would just move them around the company. So they would put the debt on one company's, and then another company, they would make a payment to that debt, but what they would really do is just take the debt and move it to another one of their companies and just keep doing that.
Okay.
And just kind of hop it around, which obviously you can't do. Goes against good accounting practices. So just for example, let's say that Ackerman had a debt on it. They would say Ackerman paid off the debt, but really they would just say, well, Techie Town took on a new loan for the exact same amount. So they just move it around.
Yeah, they were just moving around everything.
As a result of this investigation, in 2018, Steinhoff announced that they needed to write down $12 billion from their books, from their previous earnings reports, as a result of the generation of about $7.36 billion in these false transactions. And this was it occurred from 2009 to 2017, but it primarily took place between 2014 and 2017. So 3 years.
Wow.
Is when a bulk of this was happening.
Okay.
They also referred Markus Jooste to the South African authorities and started a civil claim against him for the fraud. The South African Financial Sector Conduct Authority, or the FSCA, announced it had started an investigation into the company. And they were bolstered by a call to action by the South African Parliament, who actually called some of how our Congress will call people in front of them when this stuff happens. They called Jooste and some other people in front. Of course, they just denied that.
Of course they are.
But they were like, you should go after these guys.
Yeah.
The Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation Unit, which deals with economic and corruption crimes in South Africa, and is known by many South Africans just as the Hawks, struggled with the investigation, saying that they were making slow progress. So slow that there actually still has been no charges filed in any South African court to this day, over 7 years later. That being said, we'll get into a little bit of what happened, but that being said, there was some wins on the civil side of things. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which has the ability to enforce penalties of its own, found Jooste guilty of violating listing requirements and fined him the maximum allowable penalty of 15 million rand or $810,000.
Doesn't really seem like enough money.
No, he was making like $190,000 a month.
A month.
Before bonuses, I think.
That's insane.
So he was, that's like 8 months of salary, but he made more money besides that.
Yeah.
And also banned him from being a director of any public company for the next 20 years.
Okay, that's fair.
Steinhoff also won their civil case against Jooste, and he was ordered to pay them back 870 million rand, which is $46.91 million.
Okay.
And
that's, I mean, like, not as much as he stole, but at least it's pretty big.
Also, I don't know if you can tell, there is a lot of like still questions going on about the details of this.
Yeah.
To this day, they don't really know who profited and how much,
right,
personally from this. Or at least it's not public knowledge.
Right.
You know, the investigations have been kind of whatever. But like I said, they did get at least that 870 million rand back in the salary and bonuses they gave him to try and pay back some of the people that lost money from this. They also at this time, they recovered 272 million rand or 14.67 million from their former CFO, Ben Lagrange, who was also in on it. Meanwhile, Steinhoff kept getting worse as they publicly revealed that they carried a huge debt of 161 billion rand, $12.8 billion just in debt. And they were almost on the brink of going under in 2018. However, they were able to negotiate delays on all of their debt payments for like 3 years, which kept them around, and they were able to stay in business and try to recoup some of this. They sold off some of their assets that they could increase liquidity, get some money. They kept making efforts to come back, but none of the tactics proved fruitful. So with their debt still over their heads and their stock price still in the gutter, Steinhoff International was completely liquidated in October of 2023 just ceased to be.
No more Steinhoff.
In the aftermath, much of the value of the company wasn't just erased from the pocketbooks of Steinhoff's largest investors, like Christa Weiss, the owner of the Pep stores. He very sadly lost his billionaire status as a result of this scandal.
That is just so bad. That is just too bad. Innocent people his net worth. Innocent people like Weiss should not have suffered from this.
His net worth dipped all the way down to like $735 million.
That is horrible. I hate to hear that.
Luckily, though,
that is so sad.
If you like a comeback story, he did regain billionaire status in 2023.
Thank God.
So, down but not out, King. Absolutely.
Yeah, I am so glad he was able to regain his wealth.
So it didn't just hurt these people. It also hurt many everyday people. As a lot like with Enron or big collapses in other countries, most of the largest pension funds in South Africa had been investing into Steinhoff because they were one of the biggest corporations in the entire country. And many average people saw their retirement shrink substantially because of Markus Jooste and this entire scandal. Speaking of Jooste, although the information is not public, sources say that he was secretly charged in Germany in 2020 on crimes related to the 2015 office raid. It was also said that he was ordered to turn himself over to the Hawks in South Africa in March of 2024, when they had actually, looks like that investigation picked up after 7 years, and they actually had enough evidence that they thought they could bring him in. And the FSCA had fined him in March as well an additional 475 million rand, or $25.61 million. However, the day before he was to turn himself in, he told his wife that he was going out for a walk, and he walked down to a local beach, pulled out a handgun, and he ended his life at the age of 63 rather than face his day in court.
All right, so I don't normally like it when people call people who commit suicide cowards, but in this case, you are a coward.
Yeah, he just...
you just didn't want to face the ramifications of your actions, and you're a little bitch.
Yeah, I think he was a little unhinged. Even when he left the company, he sent out like this big email that was like, usually I'd expect the CEO caught up in this to just be like fake, but he was like, I'm really sorry. I've disappointed everyone here. I've failed completely. And I was like, this is a wild, like if I worked at this company and it's like a Monday and I received this email, I'd be like,
yeah.
It's like, we're fucked, dude.
No, literally you are actually.
So yeah, I think he might have just been a little unhinged. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he probably did feel guilty, but that does not excuse all your behavior up until this point.
No, of course not.
Like, you knew what you were doing was wrong. You can feel bad all day long, but you benefited off of this for years and years and years and years and years. This was not one simple little mistake. Like, you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, and for the 7 years afterwards, he lived like fine. Like
you had all that fucking money. You're fine.
He was probably under a bunch of pressure all the time, but he
was probably stressed as hell, but you were not, like, you were never destitute.
No. The FSCA announced in September of 2024 that they were expanding their investigation past Markus Jooste, but still there have been no formal charges pressed on anyone involved in the Steinhoff scandal, both in Germany, or at least not publicly, both in Germany and in South Africa. But it is regarded as the largest of its kind in South Africa's history. So who knew furniture could be so scandalous?
Well, I've had some scandals on some furniture.
The Ottoman humpers.
Oh, yeah.
I think that Steinhoff is a perfect example of why learning about these scandals is so important, right? It's a boring name. It's a highly unglamorous sector of business that no one gives a fuck about. Completely unassuming personalities. Like, no one in here was like a big personality. But in the end, if we aren't looking hard into these multinational corporations, they can get out of hand and cost the normal person of a country extremely deeply. And because investigating them takes hours of pouring through boring documents and tallying numbers to see if things match, the fuel gets burned out of the fire long before any of the people who actually willfully led the corruption are brought to justice. It's hard to keep a passion for bringing these people to justice when it takes a whole year to write a 3,000-page investigation on what literally boils down to like they added up a bunch of numbers and like made a bunch of spreadsheets and stuff. Like, I get it. It makes it easy to sweep these things under the rug. And I never want to see someone die as a result of this. But Markus Jooste continued to deny wrongdoing in the face of a mountain of evidence. And I really do hope that the South African government tosses off its long-held reputation of being corrupt, because their government still has a reputation of being extremely corrupt, and continues to hold businesses that act in ignorance or sheer defiance of the law accountable. So I do hope they get, because it wasn't just Markus Jooste.
No, he was not the only one involved with this. No, not one person can pull this off.
No, there are some other people. And I hope that they continue the push like they say they're going to, and that someone gets arrested in this. Because, a lot of people lost jobs. A lot of people lost their living in their retirement. And at least one person lost their life. So got to figure that out. And yeah, that's the story of Steinhoff International, the largest accounting scandal in all of South African history. So
it was very interesting.
Well, thank you.
Lots of layers.
Like an onion. Or an ogre. Or a cake.
Or a redwood tree.
Yeah.
Well, that's rings.
Rings, layers. Who's counting?
I'm not going to count all that.
Right. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, you're like, damn, I loved
Steinhoff.
A hardcore accounting scandal episode. Then please show us some love by leaving a rating. You can leave a star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can write words on Apple Podcasts and, write a soliloquy about it. I don't care, but write something, right? If you're not on those, if you're a hipster of the podcast listening scene and you're on another podcatcher, well, you can probably like or follow or subscribe or something on there. So it would help us out if you would do that. You can watch our videos. All of these are recorded. There's videos. You can see our faces if you want as we talk. Those are available on Spotify or on our YouTube at White Collars Red Hands. And you can interact with us in a few other ways through our socials, facebook.com/White Collars Red Hands, Instagram at White Collars _Red Hands, X at White Collars Pod. You can get us on TikTok at White Collars Red Hands,
YouTube.
Surprisingly. YouTube was the first one.
Oh, oops.
Not going to get me.
Gotcha.
You can also go straight to our website. You can listen there if you want. For some reason. That is whitecollarsredhands.com. You can also drop us a line there. There is a place to send us a message. You can send us a DM on any of those socials I mentioned. Or you can send us an email directly at whitecollarsredhands@gmail.com. Suggest an episode. We do a fan-submitted episode every single season, or at least we try to, as long as they keep rolling in. So keep suggesting. We'll keep doing them. The best way, though, to help us out, tell a friend.
Yeah.
Word of mouth. Really get out there. Create pamphlets. Host underground meetings. Get prosecuted by a government for how much you believe in this podcast. Like, do whatever you want. Start a cult. Start a cult surrounding this podcast. As long as no one gets hurt, I'm okay with it. Believe whatever you want. Believe whatever you want. And then there was one more I wanted to say. Oh, merch. You can buy merch. We have stuff with our logo on it for sale. You can find that at
on
our website. Check out our merch, or it's in the link of the show description, wherever you're linking this. Not the episode description. It's not there. Show description. You can go there. And you know what? I think that's it.
I think you covered it all.
Right. So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week on another episode of White Collars Red Hands.